Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ryan Golden. I'm a partner at McKinsey and Company, and I work primarily in our education practice. And one of the big things that I lead there is our client service of historically Black colleges and universities. I've been doing that for the past few years. So excited to be on this panel, or to moderate this panel today with these great leaders as we talk about advancing equity in higher education. Before we get to our panelist introductions, I wanted to just start with a bit of context setting, mostly around minority serving institutions, or MSIs. And I think that just for general grounding, MSIs are incredibly important to educating students of color and students from low-income communities, where typically degree and educational attainment is low, social mobility can be somewhat stagnant, and MSIs, and particularly HSIs and HBCUs, are really key vectors to social mobility. They do all of that typically with less funding and resourcing than their non-MSI peers. And so, you know, I think that that is just kind of the good place for us to start. As I think about HSIs, a few things that I wanted to highlight for us before we started the conversation is that HSIs are actually the largest subset of MSIs. So the roughly 500 plus represent only 20% of higher education universities and colleges, but actually enroll about 2/3 of all Hispanic students, really key to mobility for Hispanic and Latin students more broadly. And you'll see a similar story with HBCUs. And so they represent about 3% of colleges and universities, but yet they confer 17% of degrees. They're enrolling 2 times more Pell-eligible students than their peers, and are also, you know, most typically underfunded as well. So all of the folks that we have on stage are all advancing equity in those areas, and so I'll ask them just to introduce themselves and talk a bit about what they're doing to drive equity on their respective campuses and organizations. Eloy, I'll start with you.
All right, thank you, Ryan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eloy Oakley, and I have the privilege of being the president and CEO of College Futures Foundation. It's a private foundation here in California focused on post-secondary success for students who have been underserved in California. Previous to that, I was the chancellor of the California Community Colleges here in California, largest and most diverse system of higher education in the country. So for us, here in California and for our foundation, it is all about driving equity for the sake of not only Californians of all backgrounds, but for the sake of the future of this great state. It is, the strength of this state is its diversity. We have no problem celebrating that. We take pride in celebrating our diversity, but underneath all that, we still see some significant inequities that exist in post-secondary outcomes, particularly in places in California like the Inland Empire, like the Central Valley, like the far north. So our foundation is trying to drive this issue forward. We support the governor's 70% attainment goal. We support organizations, intermediaries, institutions who want to drive this issue and actually create real opportunity for minoritized learners in the state of California, and hopefully through that change the narrative throughout the nation about what it means to actually create opportunity for some of the most overlooked talent in America. So I'll stop there.
Hi, thank you, Ryan. Wonderful to spend time with you and Michael and Eloy today. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nancy Gonzales, and I am the Executive Vice President and University Provost at Arizona State University. So to answer the question, what are we doing to drive equity, I thought I would just focus a little bit on the philosophy of our institution. You know, we are an institution over the past 2 decades, ASU, that has been engaged in a very radical redesign of our institution to be one that is focused very intentionally on access and inclusion, excellence in research and education, and social and global impact. And I mention access and inclusion first. It's very important, written into our charter, and something I know many of you people know by heart because I see ASU folks here, but others have probably heard that we measure ourselves by whom we include, not by whom we exclude, and how they succeed, which means that we admit students who are college ready, all students who are college ready. We do not exclude students, and then it is our mandate to ensure their success. So this philosophy, these guiding principles really undergird everything that we do at ASU. So to the question, what are you doing to drive equity? Fundamentally, everything that we do at ASU is focused on equity, whether that's the outreach to the community, pathways that we create for students to come into the university, our research mission, the experiences, the faculty, the opportunities that students get that are designed for them when they're at the university, and also all the opportunities that we try to structure for them and their families as they move out into the world and become lifelong learners with us. So everything that we're doing has that equity lens to it. I'll also say that this focus also has us in a continual state of design, redesign, evaluation, seeing what works, and kind of refinement of what we're doing. You know, the goal is really kind of year-over-year progress to become a more inclusive community, to see both student and faculty outcomes that are more and more equitable over time. Have we achieved it all? No, but it's what drives us. And then I'll also just say we are also driven by a new design aspiration, which is to pursue principled innovation, which is to put our values at the core of our decision making, so that when we are launching new ideas, new initiatives, we're asking the questions, what is the social, economic, cultural impact of what we're doing, and how is it including and benefiting communities, or how might it inadvertently be excluding people? So these are the questions that we're constantly asking ourselves. I'll also just say one thing: I'm very proud to lead this type of work at an institution where so many of us are first-generation college students. I will say, like myself, our president, Maria Anguiano, who's also on the executive team with me, as so many others. It's important that this work is intentionally driven by people who look like those who come behind us. Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here with everyone. I am Michael Sorrel. I'm the president at Paul Quinn College in Dallas, Texas. And we don't ever talk about equity. We talk about justice. We are consumed with this idea that it is not the place in this society for there to be so many people who are trapped in poverty. Our singular goal as an institution is the eradication of intergenerational poverty. We created a model, the Urban Work College model, that is laser focused on changing people's economic prospects. We all talk about education as the pathway to leading people out of poverty. With all due respect, money is the pathway of leading people out of poverty. And so our school, 75% of our students are on Pell Grants. They come from places where there's a deficit of relationships that can help them transform their economic prospects. They come from places where, and let's be very, very clear, if you qualify for a Pell Grant, you come from the lowest socioeconomic strata in the country. So America hasn't worked well for you. The economic system hasn't worked well for you. You work in shifts instead of careers. What we then say is we will stand in the gap, we will bridge that gap, we will match you with employers who are designed to give you opportunities to compete. Because it is different. If you don't have relationships, if your family doesn't have relationships, you can't access internships. That's not how it works. So you need people who will say, I've got you. So we created a whole institution which says, I've got you. And the program has worked beautifully. We are in the process now of scaling it across the country. Our goal is to create a global network of urban work colleges. We want to end poverty. It is a shame that in a country with our type of wealth that we somehow believe that this is a just system. It is not just. It is not just. Justice is far more than are you treated well if you are Black or Latino. Justice is how you are able to access the world. We believe in equity. We want it to be an equitable environment, but we also understand that as long as our folks are struggling to make ends meet, that they are defining their lives from a place of scarcity instead of a place of strength, that we will always be one step behind. We will not define our quest in the language of those who seek to oppress. Our students, their families, our goal, our mission, our vision is to eradicate poverty. And one last thing, we also think it's ridiculous that there are first-generation college students. How many colleges do we have to have before we stop having first-generation college students? I mean, think about this for a minute. This always cracks me up. We talk about this, and we talk about in the same breath, oh, there aren't enough college students. Yes, there are. Yes, there are. The issue is too many schools don't want the students who are available, right? So we created a program called the Village Program, and it's very, very simple. If you are a Pell Grant student with a 3.0 or better, when you come to Paul Quinn, you can bring 2 family members with you, right? Because higher ed is the only place where we expect those with the least amount of resources to be superheroes. Instead of asking people to save themselves, save their little cousins, save their brothers and sisters, why don't we bring the brothers and sisters and cousins with them? Right? Why don't we do that? So now, instead of you having to carry everyone on your shoulders, you have a team. So these are the types of programs that we implement with very simple goals, very, very clear. Poverty's bad, jobs are good, wealth is even better.
Thank you. That's funny. All right, well, I want us to spend some time on a few topics. First topic we want to talk about is just the broader higher education system structure and what it is doing to help advance equity or justice and what it's not doing. And I wanted to start, I just had a couple of facts I wanted to read on this. The first is that public colleges and universities spend approximately $5 billion less educating students of color than they do educating others. And the second is that if gaps in attainment were closed today, 30 million more people would hold at least an associate's degree. So, increases in the tax base and GDP, and that would lead to nearly $1 trillion to the economy annually. So with that, Eloy, I actually wanted to start with you and get your perspective on structural adjustments that would help that, and particularly given your experience in California.
We only have 27 minutes for that. Okay, let me begin with the top couple. First, we have a culture problem in higher education. I mean, we have a culture of valuing institutions that reject the greatest number of students. I mean, Nancy and ASU have highlighted that for years. We value institutions that open the doors to the greatest number of people in America the least. We value the ones that reject the most. And we pour more and more resources onto them. I mean, you just saw another $300 million to Harvard, and a good friend of mine pointed out that that's 0.5% of their endowment. So it's hardly a blip, but think about how $300 million could go to work at Paul Quinn College or at ASU or...
We would change the name of the school. Let's be very clear.
So...
You talk about naming rights, right?
Well, there you go. Whoever wants to rename Paul Quinn College.
Do you have $300 million, though?
That's right. But just think about that. I mean, we have a crazy system in America as we think about higher education. We reward places and processes that exclude. So that's the number one problem in my mind, is the way that we think about our higher education system, the way that our value system works. And as much as we keep talking about it, we still, we still wait for U.S. News and World Report to figure out where we're going to send our kids to school, and I mean, crazy stuff like that. You know, I come from community colleges. I was a product of community colleges, am a product of community colleges, and that's where real value is created. Places that actually, you know, we're by Petco Park here, so I'll use a baseball analogy. There are people who aren't even in the park who are lifted and brought home by these institutions. We value them the least. But the institutions that have a student start off at third base and then they walk home, we give them the most resources and the most prestige. So we need to rethink the value system. And then, you know, we have a challenge in that we've essentially federalized public higher education in America. States have disinvested. Arizona is a good example. And we have pushed this drive to more and more federal resources. And we hear about doubling the Pell all the time. And that sounds right on the surface, but think about why we have to continue to raise Pell. Because states are disinvesting, because public institutions are having to push their tuition higher and having to push students to get more and more federal support, more and more loans, and here we are, you know, trying to figure out what to do with the debt that constrains so many Black and brown Americans throughout this nation. So I would say those are two top things that we need to rethink as a system, because the way we're going is just, we're going to continue to have the problem that Michael pointed out. We could continue to have a system that does its best to keep out as many people as possible.
So yes, you just said what I was going to say. No, my 1 and 2 are exactly that. I think the sort of this myth that exclusivity is the definition of excellence is one that is really difficult to overcome. And we need more institutions that are willing to take the risk and to step out and to see a different way of operating. But it's a very seductive myth. I mean, how many of us, you know, are proud when we got into the elite or when our child got into the elite? It's a very seductive way of thinking, but it is something that is harming us because far too talented individuals are not getting a chance to participate. And then if we do broaden it and we think about access as and really moving the developmental needle of somebody's life and creating true social mobility as what excellence is and what we should be valued on, that's going to require a lot of other changes too. It's going to require us to then look out and see who are the students we need to serve and then what is it that they need. And there's a lot of talk now about the non-traditional is becoming the traditional. And so now people are saying, hey, we need to think about that our students are parents. Our students, you know, our students, some are homeless. Our students come with a lot of life experiences that challenge their abilities to learn and that create health disparities and mental health problems and struggles that we all need to pay attention to. The truth is, those non-traditional students, they were always there. It's now everybody realizes that, you know, as the other type of student is becoming less normative and less in number, that now we're all paying attention to it. But those are the structural changes that need to happen, and issues of financial support and affordability are going to be key to that, and how we deal with that, and you know, how do we get governments and philanthropy and partners to contribute to the financial support for a good college education. And I don't think the answer is free college for everybody, because how are you going to provide something of value if it's free to everybody? I think we need the society to pitch in ways to help us to be able to do that. You know, that there are some things that are happening at the federal level, and many states have decided that they're going to make it possible for everybody below a certain wage level, family income level, to have college supported. Those sorts of things are going to be needed, but it's to provide the opportunity to come to college, the support to come to college, the internships, the job opportunities. It's a heavy lift, but it's time for us to put our focus there.
You know, the irony of it is higher education has screwed up America. Every single person that is involved in the loggerhead that we are experiencing in our government, the anger in our civic life and our communities, all have one characteristic in common. They were all educated in American schools and universities. So there is something in the process which is leading us astray. To Eloy's point, think about how angry you would be if you were always rejected, if you were always on the outside, and if that chip on your shoulder motivated you to run for office, and you ran for office and you won. Might you have a grudge against the people who kept you on the outside? Might you have a score to settle? So we look around, and we've gotten the system, we've gotten the results that the system was designed to produce. And this idea of exclusivity is hard to overcome. Look, I'll just be transparent. I spent my whole life in elite institutions. It worked out well for me. But here's the thing. When I went to graduate school at Duke, it was the first time I had sat in school with people who had gone to public schools. So I'm sitting there in graduate school, and I'm like, oh, this person went to state school X. Probably isn't very smart. Kicked my behind, right? Because I had been educated to believe that the students I was in school with were the best and the brightest. No, I was in school with the people who could afford those institutions. There are gifted people everywhere, but we have created a system that devalues their experiences. Until we address that, we will continue to get the results that we have gotten. And we have to speak to that issue with a level of intensity because, frankly, our democracy is hanging on a thread because of it. Hanging by a thread, excuse me.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take us to a bit of student outcomes and how you are working on campus to improve student outcomes. And Nancy, I'll start with you. I'd love to get your perspective on the top 2 to 3 challenges preventing completion and broader, right, mobility outcomes and how you're addressing them at ASU.
So I would say that finances and personal struggles, family struggles are the biggest reason why students are not persisting. And kind of also the lack of the ability to see themselves in the future and to be supported in the work that they want to do and kind of find that sense of purpose and belonging. We're not doing enough to make sure everybody has that positive experience that they need to have that experience that you talked about when you went to college. Certainly was my experience when I went to college, and I think there are a lot of factors about why I think it's even getting worse, and that I think faculty are afraid to lean in ways because of the struggles of recent years. They feel ill-prepared to lean in just at a time when students need it more than ever. So, and our ability to help students to move along in their pathway is something we're laser focused on. I would call it an obsession in my office. It's something we're always looking to do, and we use a combination of technical solutions combined with humanity. And we try as much as possible. So, for example, we try to monitor students' progress, and we try to give them, we're a population of 173,000 students, so that's why technological solutions are absolutely critical. So we try to monitor students, and we draw information to try to identify students who at key points in their education look as if they're struggling. We try to provide students with services like 24/7 chat bots, 24/7 telehealth, so that they can access the help they need when they need it. But then to use things like, actionable analytics and AI-driven solutions so that we can pull out those students who we can see need more so that we can quickly get to them. And what we're trying to do is develop a system where the technology helps us deal with those students who kind of just needed to figure out how do I change out of one course into the next and take care of those things, so that we can start to work more intentionally with our community of care of people that surround our students, so that we know how to lean in and help them with that personal help that they also need. So it's something that we're developing and watching closely, but that's one example. But there are many examples of things that we do around the supports that students need. We have an attitude of just raise your hand, which is that if you need anything, and issues of food insecurity, for example, and you don't have a place to stay, and you don't have access to the internet. All of these things are so real in the lives of our students. Just raise your hand, and we will come in and provide the support that those students need.
Our students are broken, right? Our students in our country are broken. They are struggling with every issue you can imagine. And the mental health needs are extraordinary. We have created lives for them that are destroying them. And we expect them to come to college and be able to function as we believe we functioned. And I would say we believe we functioned, right? Because we have selective amnesia about what we really were like in those stages. And so for us, we mix the human component with technology, but we are heavy on the human component. So, for example, all incoming students at Paul Quinn receive mental health evaluations during their first semester at the college. Now, we do this intentionally. Number one, 96% of our students are Black or Latino. They're coming from communities where mental health wasn't stressed. May have been discussed, but the resources to be able to be treated weren't really there. And you can have public health mechanisms, but if you sit in a room for 5 hours waiting for your turn to talk to someone who's already stressed out, that's not an experience that you want to replicate. So we make sure people have one-on-one experiences where they are seen, they are heard, and then we normalize that. We have town halls at the beginning of the school year where we all stand up and we talk about the need to take care of yourself. And we don't frame it in controversial terms. We just say, listen, everybody has a season where they struggle. And if you think you haven't had a season where you struggle, you're either deceiving yourselves or you're about to hit your season of struggle, right? But we all have had that. So the only crime here is if you take your season into a lifetime when it was only meant to be a season. Let us help you prevent that from happening. And so on our campus, you will see people all the time who will say, well, I'm going to talk to the counselors. And that is one of, I think, the greatest things that we have done. It has helped us improve our outcomes. Because our outcomes look, we had a horrific graduation rate when I arrived, right? We've raised it 30+%, and we still have amazing amounts of work to do in that area. But part of it was actually asking the students, what do you need, right? How can we help? And then we had to listen. And look, they gave us answers that truthfully were very financially uncomfortable. Because once you ask the question, you have to then go deliver. And so the students talked about, well, we don't have money for school. Okay, so we cut tuition and fees by $10,000, created a different model, gave everybody a job, and we took that piece out, right? Then they talked about academic readiness. Well, then we intensified the counseling program. But there's still some things that life has done that just makes it difficult to get over that hump continuously. One of the issues that we have faced, and it has been driving us crazy, is people don't want to leave, right? So we need them to go because everybody asks us, what's your graduation rate, right? Well, we need them to get out. And they're sort of like, yeah, no, this is the best I've had it. I've got food, I've got a place to live. I have people who love me, who tell me they love me, who support me. Right? You go. Right? So that piece of it, and we didn't understand it. But then once we tapped into the trauma of poverty, we began to understand. So for us, improving outcomes in a sustainable fashion requires us to continuously assess our ability to speak to their traumas and then design programs that allow us, both through the use of AI and the use of good old traditional "how are you doing" methods to get them across the finish line.
Well, I won't repeat everything that was just said. I think these are all great points. What I will add is this. My organization published a report not too long ago called Whiteness Rules in the Hiring of America's College and University Presidents. And why we felt this was an important report is because it does affect outcomes. Who leads the institution? Michael's a great example of this. Who is leading this? Who do students see in the leadership when they walk on a campus? Who do they see in the leadership in the classroom? This is a critical part of student success for any student, and the research has bared that out. It's not just good for students of color, it's good for all students to see leaders of color, a diversity of leadership. And in America, whiteness rules in terms of how we hire college and university presidents and chancellors. We think about the norms that we use, the characteristics, how they dress. You know, did Michael walk in with a fro? Maybe not today, but...
Maybe not for the last 30 years.
But, I mean, we think about boards, recruiting firms. I mean, think about how the lack of diversity in recruiting firms in higher education. I know one recruiter of color who works in California, and now everybody wants him. But the craziness of how we operate, I think, impacts significantly student success. And the last thing I'd say is, you know, we think about the leaders of color that are in the systems. What do we use them for? To talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't, when we want to talk about academic excellence, we don't call them to be the keynote speaker. I mean, it's just craziness in how we operate in America.
Yep. And just one point to that, which I think is interesting, it's analogous also to what you see in the private sector. Often when you see a leader of color or a woman, they're called in oftentimes as like a turnaround or put in situations that would be almost impossible to solve, rather than installing them in a post where, you know, is already primed and in good place for success. So it's a really great point. This last question, I just want to talk about interventions. And, you know, as I was preparing for this panel and I was reading about Paul Quinn, you can see online, Google says it's one of the most innovative college in America. So I wanted to start with you around how you think about innovation and how that informs some of the interventions that you've already talked about with us today.
So we think that people tend to think about innovation from a very Saks Fifth Avenue perspective, right? It's the elite innovation. We're not that kind of innovation. We innovate for the target crowd, right? We used to say Walmart, that got me in trouble. So, but our innovations are designed to speak to the needs of the people we love, right? We just want to make their lives better. And time again, when we would ask our students what they needed, the issues came quite simply down to poverty. It was scarcity. Our school was in a food desert. The community that the college was in was closer to the city garbage dump than a grocery store. And think about that for a moment. How many of you even know where the garbage dump is in your city? Right? But we asked people to live in a community where they were closer to a garbage dump than a grocery store. So we turned the football field into a farm and highlighted that issue. So that's how we innovated on that front. Then we had environmental justice issues. We created an institute to highlight the environmental justice issues in under-resourced communities. Then our students said, we just can't afford school, and by the way, we're not getting good jobs when we graduate. We created the work college system so that we could address those issues, but all of it came down to what they said they needed. And we weren't worried about whether or not people thought it was fancy enough or whether or not it was trendy enough. Like, this was the issue that plagued them the most. And by the way, we think higher education should exist to solve the problems of the day, period, right? Not just the problems of people who pay. And until we do that collectively, because that's part of the reason why people are so angry at our industry, is because we simply don't speak to their needs. We've lost touch with them. So for us, we innovate for people who need people to actually see them and hear them.
Nancy, Eloy, anything you'd add?
Sure, yeah. I would say I completely agree with the perspective that innovation is about solving problems. And that's really how we approach it, and that's how we've organized our institution at every level to think about what are the problems that society needs us to solve, that our students need us to solve, that our faculty, that our communities need us to solve, and then bring people together in inclusive teams, transdisciplinary teams, teams of faculty. Our students are sometimes our most brilliant innovators because they come to the table and they can bring ideas about what we need to be pursuing. And we have been training up innovative thinking all across our campus at every level, and we don't think that innovation belongs to just a few people who have some title of innovation in their names. We really think it comes from everybody. I mean, you can be running an office of human resources, and there's an opportunity to innovate in ways that are going to advance the agenda. So innovation is very much tied to problem solving, and we think big. I mean, we do want to tackle all of the small problems, but we want to go after the really big problems for society. And inequality and poverty are huge problems. So is climate. So are many other things that we're focused on. But I agree with your perspective on the goal of innovation.
Well, the only thing I would add is just since we're here at ASU+GSV, and a lot of the conversation is how do you solve for democratizing access to post-secondary education or improving the lives of minoritized communities. You can't get that kind of innovation with a bunch of founders who have never had that experience.
Right.
We need this convention full of brown and black founders who understand what it means to have lived that experience and be able to solve the problem in that regard. So that's part of the problem with innovation is, everybody's searching for an answer without really understanding what the problem means on a personal level.
That's great, thank you. So we have 2 minutes left. We're going to finish on time. So I'm going to ask us just to do one quick round of rapid fire. What are your radical ideas to drive equity, justice within higher education?
First of all, attack the Southern legislators that are voting these ridiculous, and I'm not even going to call it critical race theory because I went to law school. This ain't critical race theory, okay? So those that are launching a campaign against the accurate history of America being taught must be defeated, because I will tell you this, if they win, all of these issues on equity, all these Hispanic serving institutions, historically black college universities, all that goes away because no one will remember why we needed them in the first place, because they weren't taught the accurate history of the country. So to me, the most radical one is for leaders to actually speak up and fight their legislators about these issues.
So I think we need to solve the access and affordability problem, and we need really big ideas and big solutions coming from our politicians and our industries and If you're in I heard somebody say in an earlier meeting, if you're in an ed tech company and you're making a lot of money because of the partnering that you're doing with higher ed, well, you need to be contributing back. And I think we all need to contribute back in ways that are going to help everybody afford and get over the financial pieces of this. So that to me is a really big one. The other one, radical or not, I think we need more partnership. I mean, we have so many different types of institutions probably just represented in this room, and we're all off on our own trying to compete rather than recognizing that we have more to gain by coming together and sharing assets. So that's one radical idea.
I will just end with this. It's, continue to break down every exclusionary barrier that is created in higher education and that we continue to cling to. I think one obvious one is just the use of standardized testing in college admissions. It's just crazy that we still cling to that. It has no relevance in the data to a student's ability to succeed in college, but we continue to cling to that as a rationing method as to who gets in and who doesn't get in. So just begin to end those exclusionary practices, and then we can talk about the real problem, which is the financing of higher education in America and the lack of financing for MSIs, HBCUs, and HSIs.
All right. Well, thank you all.